When did protecting your home cost someone else's life? My landlord ignored a rat infestation for 3 months, so I turned his negligence into the most expensive mistake of his life. I'd been living in my downtown apartment for 2 years when I first heard the scratching in the walls. At first, I thought maybe it was just the old building settling, but then I saw one. A fat brown rat scurrying across my kitchen counter at 2 a.m. when I got up for water. I screamed so loud my neighbor texted me asking if I was okay. I called my landlord Gary first thing in the morning. He owned about 12 buildings around the city and drove a different luxury car every time I saw him. The man literally had a gold Rolex but couldn't be bothered to maintain his properties. "Yeah, I'll send someone out next week," he said, sounding bored. Next week came and went. No exterminator. I called again. "Oh, they're backed up. Maybe next month." I started sleeping with my bedroom door shut and all my food in sealed containers. But the rats were getting bolder. I'd see them in broad daylight now, just casually strolling through my living room like they paid rent. The breaking point came when I woke up to find rat droppings on my pillow. I called Gary frantically. "Look, these things happen in old buildings. Maybe get a cat or something." A cat. He seriously suggested I get a cat to deal with his rat problem. That's when I discovered something beautiful called the warranty of habitability. See, in my state, landlords are legally required to maintain livable conditions. Rats definitely violate that. I started documenting everything. Every rat sighting got recorded on my phone. Every dropping got photographed with a timestamp. Every call to Gary got recorded since my state allows single-party consent. After another 2 weeks of Gary dodging my calls, I sent him a certified letter stating that due to the ongoing infestation, I would be hiring my own exterminator and deducting it from rent. He finally called back screaming about how I couldn't do that. I calmly read him the statute number. He hung up on me. The exterminator I hired was thorough. He found entry points all over the building and evidence of a massive colony in the walls. "This has been going on for months, maybe years," he told me. The bill was $2,800 for the initial treatment. I paid it and deducted it from my rent with a copy of the invoice. Gary showed up at my door the next day, red-faced and sweating. "You can't just not pay rent," he yelled. I handed him a folder. Inside was every photo, every video, every documented call. I paid rent. I just deducted the legally allowed repair costs. He tried to serve me an eviction notice the next week. That's when things got interesting. See, I'd been talking to my neighbors. Turns out 8 other units had rat problems too. We formed a little group chat. Everyone started documenting. Everyone started getting their own exterminators. Everyone started deducting from rent. Gary's lawyer must have told him he was screwed because the eviction notice got withdrawn real quick. But I wasn't done. I called the health department, showed them my documentation. They did an inspection of the whole building. Failed spectacularly. Gary got hit with $15,000 in fines and a mandate to professionally treat all 12 of his buildings. The local news picked up the story after I posted about it online. "Slumlord ignores rat crisis" wasn't a great headline for his business. 3 of his buildings went into foreclosure within 6 months. But the best part was still coming. Remember that warranty of habitability thing? Well, it turns out when landlords violate it, tenants can sue for damages. All 9 of us filed a joint lawsuit. Gary had ignored the problem for so long, and we had so much documentation that his insurance company settled immediately. $5,000 per tenant plus legal fees. Then one midnight, I got a phone call. Gary was drunk out of his mind. "My baby girl is going to die because of you. I can't afford her medication, and it's all your fault." I pressed the end call button and just sat there in my dark apartment. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone to save the recording. I uploaded it to Google Drive first, then Dropbox, then iCloud just to be safe. Gary's words kept playing in my head about his daughter dying because of me. The whole thing had started with rats in my walls, and now here I was at midnight listening to a drunk man blame me for his kid's medical problems. I couldn't shake the feeling that my revenge had gone way further than I ever planned. The clock on my microwave said 12:47 a.m., but I knew sleep wasn't happening. I grabbed my phone and texted my neighbor asking if she heard Gary yelling through the walls. She texted back right away saying she'd been awake worrying about me since this whole mess started. She suggested we meet for coffee in the morning to talk about it. I spent the rest of the night staring at my ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. At 7 a.m., I threw on some clothes and walked to the coffee shop on the corner. My neighbor was already there, waiting with 2 cups steaming on the table. I pulled out my phone and played her the recording of Gary's call. Her face went white as she listened to him slurring about his daughter. She set down her cup and looked at me seriously. "He's blaming you for his daughter's situation," she said. "That sounds like harassment or maybe even a threat." I nodded because I'd been thinking the same thing. We sat there for another hour going over everything that had happened. When I got home, I opened my laptop and started making a timeline of every single interaction with Gary. I wrote down the date of my first rat complaint and every call after that. I added the exterminator visit and the $2,800 bill I'd deducted from rent. I included when Gary showed up at my door screaming and when he tried to evict me. I documented the health department inspection and the $15,000 in fines he got hit with. I wrote down the lawsuit settlement for $5,000 per tenant, and now this drunk phone call about his daughter. My old habit of documenting everything from the rat situation was impossible to break. Having it all written out in order helped me think more clearly about what to do next. I remembered a tenant in our building had mentioned an attorney named Lillian Jackson who helped with landlord problems. I found her number and called her office that afternoon. Her assistant said she could meet with me later that week. When Lillian got on the phone, she told me to keep documenting everything, especially if Gary contacted me again. She said drunk calls blaming tenants for personal problems weren't okay no matter what his situation was. While I was dealing with the lawyer stuff, my phone buzzed with a message in our tenant group chat. It was from Wyatt Nguyen, who lived on the third floor. He'd been tracking Gary's legal stuff and said Gary just filed for bankruptcy. Wyatt suggested we all meet to talk about what this meant for our settlement payments. Everyone agreed to meet at the community center down the street the next evening. When I got to the meeting, about half the tenants were celebrating Gary finally getting what he deserved. The other half looked uncomfortable and kept shifting in their seats. One woman who worked at the pharmacy on 5th Street mentioned she knew Gary's daughter from filling her prescriptions. She said the girl really did have serious health problems that needed expensive medication. The room got quiet after that, and people started looking at their phones. Wyatt tried to get everyone focused on the bankruptcy stuff and what it meant for our money. 2 days later, I met with Lillian Jackson at her office downtown. She listened to the drunk call recording and immediately started typing up a harassment complaint. She explained that Gary couldn't blame tenants for using their legal rights no matter how bad his finances got. She said the law was clear about landlords not retaliating against tenants who report violations. While she was working on the paperwork, my phone rang with a call from Amy Haynes at the health department. She wanted to schedule another inspection of our building next week. She mentioned that 3 more of Gary's buildings got flagged for violations after our story hit the news. Apparently, other tenants in his properties saw the coverage and started reporting their own problems. Amy said the city was taking this seriously now and checking all his buildings. The next morning, I got an email from Dwayne Browning, who was the reporter that covered our rat story. He wanted to do a follow-up piece about what happened after the lawsuit. I agreed to talk to him but said I wanted to stay anonymous. I also told him I wouldn't discuss anything about Gary's family or his daughter's medical situation. That wasn't part of the story I wanted out there. 2 days went by before my phone buzzed with another voicemail from Gary, and this time he sounded stone-cold sober but desperate as hell. He was asking if I'd drop the harassment complaint if he promised to never contact me again, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background like he was reading from notes. I didn't even listen to the whole thing before forwarding it straight to Lillian, who called me back within 10 minutes telling me not to respond to Gary under any circumstances. She said she'd handle all communication through legal channels from now on to protect me from any potential retaliation claims, and that responding directly could weaken our position. The next morning, Amy showed up for the health department re-inspection with 2 other inspectors and a thick clipboard full of forms. They spent 4 hours going through every inch of the building, and what they found behind the walls where the rats had been was way worse than anyone expected. Water damage had been seeping through for who knows how long, and there were early signs of black mold spreading through the insulation. Amy pulled me aside and showed me photos on her tablet of the damage, saying this could have been prevented with proper maintenance years ago, but Gary had let it rot. While the inspectors were still working, Wyatt texted our group chat with screenshots of messages Gary had been sending to other tenants in the building. We all started comparing notes in the chat and realized Gary was telling different sob stories to different people, trying to guilt us in whatever way he thought would work. He told the single mom on the 2nd floor that his ex-wife was threatening to take his kids away, and told the elderly couple on 4 that he might lose his own mother's house. Everyone was getting these messages, and Wyatt suggested we document everything and share it with our lawyers immediately. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived with an official notice that our building was evaluated for sale as part of Gary's bankruptcy proceedings. The letter said potential buyers would be touring the property over the next few weeks, and we needed to allow access for inspections, which meant strangers would be walking through our homes. The uncertainty about who might buy the building and what they'd do with it made my stomach twist, because we all knew new owners usually meant higher rent or renovations that forced people out. I called Lillian right away, and she said this was actually good timing, because Gary's pattern of contacting tenants was escalating, and she was already working on something. She filed for a temporary restraining order on behalf of our entire tenant group that same day, saying we needed legal protection before Gary's behavior got worse or turned into something more serious. 3 days later, I was home when the first group of potential buyers came through with some property management company representative who kept talking loudly on his phone. I pretended to be busy in my kitchen, but I could hear them discussing major renovations, and one guy actually said they were thinking about gutting entire units to modernize everything. They were talking about knocking down walls and combining smaller apartments into larger ones, which would mean we'd all have to relocate at least temporarily, if not permanently. The property manager kept mentioning something about market rate adjustments and maximizing rental income, which told me everything I needed to know about their plans. That same week, Gary's lawyer sent a formal letter to all of us claiming our lawsuit had caused undue hardship to Gary's family and demanding we consider the human cost of our actions. Lillian actually laughed out loud when she read it to me over the phone and said it was a desperate move that wouldn't hold up in court for even 5 seconds. She said lawyers only send letters like that when they have absolutely nothing else and are hoping to guilt people into backing down, which wasn't going to work. I decided to do some digging on my own and submitted a Freedom of Information request to the city, asking for any violations or complaints against Gary's properties going back 10 years. What came back 2 weeks later was shocking even to me, because Gary had been cited for violations at his properties, going back 8 years with the same problems showing up over and over. There were complaints about rats and roaches and mold and broken heating systems and busted pipes, and every single time Gary would do the bare minimum to get the inspector off his back, then ignore the problem again. The pattern of negligence was worse than any of us had realized, and it showed this wasn't just about our building, but about how Gary ran his whole business. Meanwhile, Wyatt had been doing his own research into Gary's finances and discovered something that made Lillian sit up straight when we told her. Gary had transferred ownership of several properties to his wife's name just 2 weeks before declaring bankruptcy, which looked really suspicious. Lillian said this could be considered fraudulent asset hiding, and she immediately started preparing documents to bring this to the bankruptcy court's attention because it could change everything about how his assets got distributed. The next morning, my computer screen at work kept going blurry, and I realized I'd been staring at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes without doing anything. My boss knocked on my cubicle wall and asked if everything was okay since I'd missed 2 deadlines that week. I told her about the whole mess with Gary and the building, and she listened while tapping her pen on her clipboard. She said she understood, but the company needed me focused, and maybe I should take some personal days to sort things out. I went back to my desk and tried to concentrate, but my phone kept buzzing with updates from the tenant chat. Amy called that afternoon with her inspection results, and the news was bad. The mold behind the walls had spread through most of the building's framework, and fixing it would mean tearing out huge sections of drywall. She said we might need to move out for at least 2 months while they did the work, and the city would require Gary or whoever owned the building to pay for temporary housing. I forwarded her report to Lillian and tried to get back to work, but then my phone lit up with another voicemail from Gary. I could hear crying sounds in the background, and his voice was slurred again, so I just hit forward and sent it straight to Lillian without listening to the whole thing. Wyatt texted the group chat with a photo of a piece of paper he found under his door that morning. The note said he should stop causing trouble, or things would get worse for him and his family. The handwriting looked like the same writing from a maintenance request form Gary had filled out months ago. We went to the police station together and filed a report, but the officer behind the desk barely looked up from his computer. He said without proof of who wrote it, they couldn't do much, but they'd add it to the file. The insurance company called a meeting the next day about our settlement money. Their representative sat across from us in a conference room downtown and explained that with Gary declaring bankruptcy, they wanted to change the deal. Instead of $5,000 each, they were offering $3,000, but we'd get it within 2 weeks instead of waiting months for the bankruptcy court. Half our group wanted to take it and be done, while the others thought we should fight for the full amount. We argued for an hour before agreeing to think about it and meet again in a few days. Dwayne's follow-up article came out that weekend, and he'd been careful not to use any of our names. The piece talked about how landlords sometimes try to scare tenants who stand up for their rights, and were included quotes from housing lawyers about what counts as illegal retaliation. The article got shared thousands of times online, and the comments section filled up with people telling their own bad landlord stories. Monday morning, I got an email from HR saying someone had sent them links to all the news coverage about our building. They wanted to meet immediately to discuss whether I'd been using company time or resources for personal legal matters. I had to bring printouts showing all my Gary-related emails and calls happened during lunch breaks or after hours. The HR manager reminded me 3 times that the company had a policy against activities that could damage their reputation. Lillian set up a mediation session with the insurance company about getting money for temporary housing during the mold cleanup. She thought we had a good shot at getting them to cover hotel costs or rental assistance since their client's negligence caused the whole problem. The mediation was scheduled for next Thursday, and she told us all to keep documenting any new expenses or problems. A guy in a suit showed up at the building on Tuesday, claiming to represent the company that wanted to buy the property. He had a clipboard and started knocking on doors asking everyone about their jobs and how much money they made and whether they had any criminal records. When he got to my door, I told him I wasn't comfortable answering personal questions without my lawyer present. He said that wasn't a good attitude for someone who wanted to keep living there after the sale. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone and sent it to Lillian right away. 3 days later, we got the good news we'd been waiting for. The judge signed our restraining order against Gary, which meant he couldn't contact any of us directly or through other people for 6 months. If he tried to call or email or show up at the building, he could go to jail. Lillian said this would help protect us while we dealt with the building sale and repairs. The court papers got delivered to Gary's lawyer that same afternoon, and we all felt like we could breathe a little easier knowing there was real legal protection in place now. The next morning, Lillian forwarded me a copy of Gary's bankruptcy filing she'd gotten from the court website. I scrolled through page after page of debt on my phone while eating breakfast. He owed $3 million to various banks for property loans, another $800,000 to contractors who'd done work he never paid for, $200,000 in back taxes to the city. Our lawsuit for $45,000 was just a tiny piece of his mess. The document showed he'd been juggling loans for years and using new credit to pay old debts. I screenshot the important parts and sent them to our group chat. Everyone started texting back immediately about whether we'd ever see our settlement money now. Amy called me around noon to schedule another inspection. She said the city wanted to check the whole building again after getting complaints from other tenants about new problems. When she showed up 2 days later with her clipboard and flashlight, she went straight to the basement. I followed her down the creaky stairs and watched her shine her light on the walls. She pointed at black marks along the electrical boxes and wires hanging loose from the ceiling. The rats had chewed through the protective coating on dozens of wires. She took photos of exposed copper and melted plastic around outlets. "This is a fire waiting to happen," she said while writing notes. She tested outlets with some device that started beeping immediately. Half the circuits in the building weren't grounded properly anymore. The inspection took 3 hours and she found problems in every single unit. Water damage from leaking pipes the rats had gnawed. More mold growing behind bathroom walls. Windows that wouldn't lock because the frames were rotting. She handed me a copy of her preliminary report before leaving. The building needed at least $200,000 in repairs just to meet basic safety codes. That afternoon, Dwayne texted me saying someone from a landlord association had called him. They wanted to give their side of the story about how tenant lawsuits were destroying small property owners. I called him back and he played me the voicemail on speaker. The guy was saying tenants like us were making it impossible for good landlords to stay in business. My hands were shaking as I listened to him blame us for the housing crisis. Dwayne said he wasn't going to include their comments since they couldn't provide any actual data to back up their claims. Our group chat exploded that night when the insurance company sent a new offer. They wanted to cut our settlement to $3,000 each and pay it out over 6 months. Half the group wanted to take it just to get something. The other half thought we should fight for the original amount. We argued in the chat for hours with people getting more and more upset. Maria said she needed money now for her kids' medical bills. Tom thought we'd get nothing if we waited. Wyatt kept saying we shouldn't let them push us around. Nobody could agree on anything, and people started leaving the chat. I spent all weekend at my kitchen table with my laptop and calculator trying to figure out my options. Moving would cost at least $3,000 between deposits and truck rental and time off work. Staying meant dealing with construction for months and probably higher rent after. I made spreadsheet after spreadsheet, but the numbers never looked good. My savings account had $4,000 in it, and my credit cards were almost maxed. If I moved, I'd have nothing left for emergencies. If I stayed, I'd be living in a construction zone, breathing dust and dealing with noise all day. Monday morning, Wyatt called me panicking. His 2-year-old had been coughing for a week, and it kept getting worse. The doctor did tests and said it might be from mold exposure. She gave them medicine, but said they should leave the building as soon as possible. Wyatt was looking at apartments online while his wife packed boxes. He said they couldn't risk their kids' health, even if it meant breaking their lease and losing their deposit. The property management company sent someone over that Thursday to talk to tenants about their plans for the building. The guy wore an expensive suit and kept checking his phone while he talked. He said vague things about keeping current tenants and making improvements. When Mrs. Wong asked about rent increases, he smiled and said they'd evaluate after renovations were complete. His assistant handed out forms asking about our income and employment history. I didn't fill mine out. The mediation sessions with the insurance company started the next week. We sat in a conference room downtown for 6 hours the first day. Lillian argued that we deserved full compensation for the unsafe conditions. The insurance lawyer kept saying Gary's bankruptcy changed everything. The mediator suggested different payment plans and amounts. We went back 2 more times that week. Each session felt like we were getting worn down bit by bit. Finally, on the 3rd day, we reached a deal. $3,000 each, but we'd get it within 30 days. Plus $1,200 for temporary housing during repairs. Plus a promise that repairs would start within 2 months. It wasn't what we wanted, but everyone was exhausted from fighting. We signed the papers and hoped they'd actually follow through. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Gary apologizing for everything and asking if we could talk. My stomach dropped as I realized he was violating the restraining order. I took a screenshot immediately and forwarded it to Lillian. She called me within 5 minutes telling me not to respond and that she'd file a violation report first thing in the morning. The next day, 2 police officers showed up at Gary's new apartment to give him a formal warning. One of them called me afterward to confirm they'd delivered it. He said Gary seemed surprised that a text message counted as contact. The officer made it clear that any more attempts to reach out could mean jail time. Gary's lawyer called Lillian an hour later, promising it wouldn't happen again. 2 days later, Dwayne called me while I was eating lunch at my desk. He said he'd gotten hold of my drunk call recording through one of his sources at the phone company. I nearly choked on my sandwich hearing that. He told me he'd listened to it but wasn't going to use it in his next piece. I've got standards about not exploiting family medical stuff, he said before hanging up. That afternoon, I spent 3 hours going through all my social media accounts. I deleted every angry post about Gary and removed all the photos of the rat damage. Lillian had texted me earlier saying to keep everything strictly factual for any future legal stuff. My Facebook had 12 posts about the whole mess, and I took down 9 of them. The remaining 3 just had basic facts about the health violations. My Twitter had even more stuff to clean up. I'd been really mad when I posted some of those tweets. The next morning, we all met at Lillian's office to sign the updated settlement agreement. The conference room was packed with all 9 tenants, plus Lillian and 2 people from the insurance company. They'd finally agreed to give us $1,500 each for relocation help during repairs. The timeline showed work starting in 2 weeks and lasting at least 3 months. Not everyone was happy about the compromise, but we all signed anyway. Maria kept shaking her head while signing her papers. Tom muttered something about lawyers getting rich while we got screwed. The remediation crew showed up exactly 2 weeks later with 3 huge trucks. They started tearing into the walls on the first floor at 7 in the morning. The noise was so loud I could feel it in my chest. Dust started floating through the air vents within an hour. I put towels under my door, but it didn't help much. By noon, they'd opened up 6 walls and found way more damage than expected. The foreman showed me photos on his phone of rotted wood and old rat nests. He said the whole building needed major work. That night, I couldn't stop coughing from all the dust. I packed 2 suitcases and my laptop bag and checked into the budget hotel across town. The room was tiny with a bed that squeaked every time I moved. The bathroom had mold in the corners, which seemed pretty ironic, but at least I could breathe without coughing. After 3 days there, my cough started getting better. Work got complicated fast when I tried to do video calls from the hotel. The Wi-Fi kept cutting out during important meetings. My boss pulled me aside on a call and said she understood my situation, but needed me to figure something out. I bought a mobile hotspot, but it barely helped. The hotel cleaning staff kept knocking during calls, even though I put up the Do Not Disturb sign. I started working from a coffee shop down the street just to get reliable internet. 3 weeks into the remediation, Amy called to schedule her inspection. She came by my unit while the crew was on lunch break. She tested the air quality and checked all the areas they'd repaired. After an hour, she said my unit passed, but the common areas still needed work. The hallways had exposed walls and plastic sheets everywhere. She said I could move back if I wanted, but warned it would still be a construction zone. I decided to stay at the hotel for now. Wyatt texted our group chat that night saying his family was moving out permanently. His kid's cough hadn't gotten better, and the doctor said they needed to leave. He'd found a place in the suburbs that cost more but had no mold or rats. Within a week, 4 more tenants announced they were leaving too. Everyone was using their settlement money for deposits on new places. The building was starting to feel empty. Lillian called me 2 weeks later with bad news. The settlement payment was stuck in bankruptcy court. She'd filed 3 motions trying to get it released, but the judge wanted more documentation. She said it could take another month or even longer. I looked at my credit card statement that night and felt sick. I'd already spent $2,000 on the hotel and food. My cards were almost maxed out. The next 6 weeks were a blur of legal delays and money stress. Lillian filed motion after motion while I watched my debt grow. The bankruptcy court kept asking for more paperwork. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, she called saying the money was coming through. Not the full $5,000, but $3,800 after all the legal fees. The check showed up 3 days later. I deposited it immediately and paid off my credit cards that same day. The relief felt amazing, even though it wasn't everything we'd been promised. I put $800 in savings for emergencies and used the rest to start looking for a new apartment. The search took forever because every place I looked at had something wrong with it, like water damage or weird smells or sketchy landlords who reminded me of Gary. 3 weeks into looking, I got a letter from some company called Meridian Property Management, saying they'd bought our building and would be making improvements, but also doing rent assessments after renovations were done. I threw the letter in my pile of moving boxes and kept searching apartment listings every morning before work. Tom from our tenant group texted me that he'd heard Gary was working for another landlord now, as just a regular property manager making way less money. He also said Gary's daughter got into some clinical trial that gave her free medication, which was good because nobody wanted a sick kid suffering even if her dad was a jerk. I finally found a place after 5 weeks of looking on the north side of town in a smaller building with only 6 units. The landlord actually answered my email within an hour, and when I toured the place, he showed me recent inspection reports and pest control certificates without me even asking. The apartment was smaller than my old one and cost $50 more a month, but the kitchen had been updated, and there were no weird stains on the ceiling or scratching sounds in the walls. I signed the lease that same day and put down my deposit using part of the settlement money. Wyatt texted asking if I wanted to grab coffee before I moved, since we'd probably lose touch once I left the building. We met at the place on 5th Street where we'd had our first tenant meeting about the rats. He brought his kid who was running around the coffee shop while we talked about how crazy the whole thing had been. We exchanged phone numbers and both said we'd keep in touch, but I could tell from his face he knew we probably wouldn't, except for maybe a happy holidays text once a year. Moving day came 2 weeks later, and I packed everything into boxes I'd gotten from the liquor store down the street. I still wrapped all my food in plastic bags and sealed containers, even though the new place had been inspected because old habits are hard to break. The movers I hired were fast and had everything loaded in 2 hours, then unloaded at the new place in less than an hour. I spent the rest of the day unpacking and setting up my bedroom first, so I'd have somewhere to sleep that night. The new apartment was so quiet I actually had trouble falling asleep at first, because I was used to all the construction noise and people yelling in the hallways. I kept waking up expecting to hear scratching or see droppings, but there was nothing, just the normal sounds of pipes and the upstairs neighbor walking around. After a week, I stopped checking the corners for rat droppings every morning, and after a month, I stopped keeping all my food in sealed containers. 6 months went by, and I was walking past a computer at the library when I decided to check the city housing website just to see what happened with the old building. The inspection records showed it had finally passed all codes, and the violations had been cleared. Maria from our old tenant group texted me sometimes with updates about people we knew, and everyone seemed to have found better places to live. Tom had moved in with his girlfriend and saved money on rent, while Wyatt's family bought a small house in the suburbs where his kid could have a yard to play in. I thought about everything that had happened, starting with those first scratching sounds in the walls and ending with me in a clean, quiet apartment where the landlord actually fixed things when they broke. Gary had lost his fortune and had to work for someone else now, but his daughter was getting the medicine she needed, which made the whole thing less black and white than I'd wanted it to be. The other tenants and I had fought back against a bad landlord and won, but it wasn't some perfect victory where the bad guy got destroyed, and we all lived happily ever after. Real life is messier than that, with sick kids and bankruptcy and people just trying to get by even when they've done wrong. I sleep better now knowing I stood up for myself and helped 8 other people stand up too, but sometimes I still wonder if we could have handled it differently, though I'm not sure how. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you. It's been a ride just wondering together. Until next time, take care out there. Like the video, it helps more than you think.